Welcome to today's podcast. You're listening to the David F. Haas podcast, formerly the Rise Up Rich podcast. I changed the name. But anyways, today's podcast, I'm alone, solo. We're in quarantine here in Windsor, Ontario, so no podcast guests for the next little bit, I guess, unless I can do them over Zoom. Today's podcast, I want to get into, I guess, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but it's the concept of God. And the reason that I want to get into this is because I think God has become controversial. You know, it's the whole concept of is there a God, and whether you believe in God or not has become like this subject where if you believe in God, you're stupid. And at some point along the lines, when people started believing in science and stuff, they made it seem that if you believe in God, then that you're stupid. And I was once there. I once believed that people that believed in God were of lower intelligence. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, geez. I remember I had this business partner who used to pray over his food every time he ate, and I always used to make fun of him for it. But now I do that. So he was way ahead of where I was today. So just because there's a lot of good that comes from blessing your food before you eat it, and just seeing your food as something that is nurturing and loving, no matter what you're eating. And a lot of times with food, we get into this mindset that oh, if I eat this, I'm going to get fat, or it's going to cause cancer, or whatever it may be. And if that's the thought you have when you're thinking about eating food, and you put that into your body, well, that food will end up manifesting into your life those negative consequences that you don't want. So there's a lot of importance in blessing your food. So I think what I want to do with this podcast is I want to give you what my understanding of God is after the last real 15 years of real deep spiritual development. When I say spiritual, I don't mean religious. I mean spiritual development, understanding who we truly are at our true essence at a soul level, learning how to connect to that. I'm going to talk to you about some of the, I would call them miracles that I've seen performed, that I've been able to witness, that have happened to me personally. And then at the end, you can make your own decision whether you want to believe in something higher than yourself. And ultimately, there's no judgment here. This is just what I've been able to come to the realization for myself. There will come a point in your life, though, where you have to believe in something greater than yourself. As you believe that you are the be-all, end-all, your growth is going to be limited. That's ultimately what I've come to the realization, is that there has to be a belief in something higher than yourself. And you can watch the people that are performing at the highest levels. The first thing they always thank is God. Right. So as I started becoming more aware of the concept of God, I started noticing that these super achievers were referring to God a lot. And that was what kind of started turning me on to the concept and starting opening the door. Now, the funny thing about my story is that I grew up in church. My mother was a minister. So from the age of 0 to 9 years old, essentially, I was in a church a lot. I would go to work with my mom. I'd play around in the church when she was, doing work on weekends. I was in mass every Sunday. I was going to Sunday school. My mom was reading the Bible all the time. A lot of the lessons we learned were spiritual or religious-based lessons, I guess you could say. But then when my mom died of cancer, at age 9, there became a lot of resentment towards God, anger towards God. Why did God take her away from me? And maybe that could be a whole entire podcast of anger and resentment towards God when bad things happen to us. But so I kind of fell off. And then 30 years later, being introduced to my mentor, or not 30, sorry, 20 years later, being introduced to my mentor, not 20 either, 10 years. From age 9, so when I was 22, I met Andrew when I bought into Treehouse, and even Andrew he wasn't even fully there at that point. He was moving more and more towards the spiritual. He was very focused at the time on the physical with the food, But then his knowledge base evolved into the spiritual when he got introduced to Dr. David Hawkins. And that is kind of where, so Andrew studied under David Hawkins, and then basically I studied under Andrew. And then that's where this whole spiritual healing, spiritual coaching, the letting go method, all the things that I teach in my one-on-one sessions with my clients, my group sessions, and my online courses that are coming very soon. These are all the things that I teach people now to discover the presence of God. Hawkins wrote a book called Discovering the Presence of God, which I would check out, but it's a tough read. Really sends you down some places, some real deep places, that if you're not really open to learning, to opening the door to God and the belief in God, it'll be a tough read. So I wouldn't start there. If you did want to start somewhere, I would start with Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. And he mentions God throughout that book multiple times. And let me give you my understanding of what God is. So to me, when I was a kid, God was the big white guy in the sky, a big guy with a white beard in the sky. Not a big white guy. Big white guy with a beard in the sky, and he was playing us all like puppets. And then, now looking back, you could just see how that was a silly view of God. And I can see how people that are atheist or are agnostic, meaning they don't really know the difference between whether there is the God, there isn't a God. I can see why they would be turned off by the concept of God when it is a belief of this big guy with a white beard in the sky controlling us all. And I don't believe that is from what my experience, that's what God is. So my belief in God is this, that God is all powerful, all knowing, and all present. Okay. So imagine an energy that was everywhere, knew everything, and was all powerful, could do anything. Now that is something I get more in tune with. And so then I started getting turned on to the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. So I'm reading a lot of David Hawkins, I'm reading a lot of Joe Dispenza, I'm around my mentor Andrew, and I start just kind of making my own conclusions based on all of the work that I've done. And Joe Dispenza is big on this, the energy of God is the presence of God is in the empty space that connects us all. So just looking in here in this room is like there's a ton of empty space in this room. And, if you look at a molecule, the actual matter in a molecule is only 0.00001% of what makes up the molecule. And 99.99999% is empty space. So Joe Dispenza, I don't know if he's ever said this or not, but I'm assuming, is that God is the empty space. So now I know what you're saying. You're saying, okay, I get that empty space is all present. So it's all around us at all times. It connects the entire world. It connects the entire universe. And it is, there's nothing that blocks empty space, right? So it is all present. It's all around us at all times. So, the next question is, how can it be all knowing? Well, if you would assume that this empty space sees all, right, then it would know everything that's ever happened in the entire universe, because it's been there for everything. It's just like if you saw something, you would know that it would be stored in your memory. So it sees all this empty space. I don't know. I'm probably losing you guys here. The last thing is that it's all powerful, and this is where a lot of people get lost. Is like, how can empty space be powerful? Well, there is, if you take, I have this thing that I do a lot. I think I've mentioned this in a podcast, that if you take a piece of paper and you rip it in half, and then you and you take that half and you rip it in half, and you take that half and you rip it out, and you keep doing that, eventually, if you rip it in half enough and you get down to the microscopic level, you're going to get to an atom, right? And if you rip an atom in half, what do you have? You have an atom bomb. So that is why it's been said that there is more energy in 1 square inch of empty space than is required to build the entire universe. So that is where the power of God comes in. If you're considering God to be empty space, that energy that interconnects us all. That is my understanding of God, right? And when you can tap into that power, holy cow, like the abilities would be considered miracles. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what I've experienced when it comes to tapping into this power. And when I say tapping into it, I'm saying like I'm scraping the surface of this thing. Like I'm not really fully, truly connecting. I'm not anywhere near an enlightened person, right? So an enlightened person is essentially someone that has been able to transcend the ego and tap into their higher self, which is their soul or their spiritual self, the energetic representation of themselves. And that energetic representation can interact with God instantaneously. Okay, so I was just listening to Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, really, really interesting podcast. And Elon Musk is talking about the interface between humans and computers. And he says, essentially, we already are cyborgs because we have our cell phones here. He said, the problem with the cyborgs is that the problem with our cyborg is that the process is too slow to get information. But essentially, this phone is a representation or an extension of our own personal memory. Think about it. It memorizes all of our phone numbers. It stores all of our images and our pictures. It stores, which essentially could be our memories. And it has all the information that we need at our fingertips. We can answer any question with this phone, right? But he said the process is too slow to get the information from the phone to the brain, okay? So what he's trying to do, which is, getting crazy with Neuralink, is he is trying to essentially tap that phone, that knowledge, and connect it right into our brain. So there is no more having to type to get the information. You just think about it and it pops into your brain, right? Which is wild to think about. And like they're making like real advances with this thing. So I mean, that could be a possibility in the future. But that is kind of a cool representation or a cool example or a good way to visualize how what is possible when we connect to the spiritual fields, or when we connect to the infinite intelligence, that all-knowing, all-present, all-powerful energy. That is what could happen, is that instead of having to try and figure things out, it could happen in an instant, okay? And this is what started really exciting me about understanding what happens when we're in spiritual healing treatments and understanding what is actually possible. So this is when I got introduced to this woman named Anita Moorjani, and she wrote this book called Dying to Be Me. And who Anita was this woman that she was riddled with cancer. She was on her deathbed, and she had tumors all over her body, and she essentially died. And she went into the spiritual realm where she could see everything. She was connected to it all, just like Neuralink, right? It was like a matrix. I know Kung Fu, right? If you've seen the Matrix, he like in a 2-second link, he knew everything about Kung Fu, right? And so this is essentially what happened to Anita when she went to the other side, as she describes it. And she could see everything that had ever led to all of the decisions that had led to her to being ill and being sick. And she knew that after seeing everything, that if she was able to come back to Earth, she would be healed of all of her cancer. And she had a choice to make. And she ultimately made the choice to come back because she could see the pain that it would cause her husband if she left, right? So she decided to come back, and she knew that she would be healed. So as soon as she came back into the body, so she was essentially healed. It took a few weeks after that for all the tumors and everything to disappear. She was like this medical marvel. She said that the doctors were looking for the cancer in her, and they couldn't find it. They kept on bringing her back in saying, we need to do more tests, and they couldn't find it, right? So this is the power that is actually available to us all. We don't need to die, and that's why she wrote this book, Dying to Be Me. We don't need to die in order to experience the miraculous. We can tune into it by learning how to let go, right? And that's why the basis of all my coaching is around the letting go method. It's like learning how to let go of our fears, learning how to let go of the ego, learning how to let go of the programs, the emotions, the belief systems that are holding us back from achieving our maximum potential. So what is our maximum potential? Well, it could be to heal cancer in a fucking instant. I don't know. I haven't experienced it yet, but I've seen people heal of cancer. Okay? Through I don't want to say in an instant, but through that process that I just described of letting go. Okay, letting go of the programs and combined with spiritual healing treatments. What the person I'm thinking about is Niviana from Cares and Days, and I did a podcast with her, and you can go back into my podcast and you can hear that story. You can hear her story of healing, and it's not just this instantaneous snap of the fingers that happened, but it happened through getting connected with your spiritual self. Now, if you're like a regular podcast listener, you're going like, what the fuck is Dave talking about here? Right? So I know I'm going off on a tangent, but ultimately I believe that this is where I'm being guided to go. And the people that I'm going to attract are the people that are interested in this kind of stuff. So there was resistance in the beginning when I started this to be kind of more lean towards the business side of things and how to become more successful. But now I can just see that there's just so much more power in speaking the truth of what I've really truly discovered. So let's get into this a little bit deeper. So God is all powerful, all present, all knowing. Now I want to talk about the all knowing here for a minute. So essentially what all knowing could be described as is, I've heard it described as like collective consciousness. Okay. And this is the consciousness of all of mankind, right? Well, not even mankind. All of the universe, all of every animal, every cell, everything that's ever happened. That's what we can tune into. And there's this kid, Jacob Barnett, that when he was like 11 years old, he like disproved the Big Bang Theory. I don't know. Don't quote me on these exact same things, but you can check him out on YouTube, Jacob Barnett, and he's speaking to a bunch of students, I think at MIT. And he says, you guys are learning all wrong, right? You're looking at information, right? Memorizing it and then applying it. And he's like, this is like the last thing that you want to do to really become like a really truly creative thinker, right? He says you want to become connected to the field of infinite intelligence, right? And he says this in a roundabout way. He says you want to be connected to this field of infinite intelligence in order to become truly creative and get outside of the circle of what we know. And I'm obviously paraphrasing this. I'm combining his work with Andrew's work, but to get outside that circle of what we know, we got to get into the field. And what's he talking about? What is the field? The field is collective consciousness. Okay. The field is that all-knowing power that is around us at all times. So let me give you a couple more examples of what collective consciousness is. Collective consciousness is essentially the world's memory, the universe's, I should say, memory. So everything that's ever happened since the beginning of time has been stored into collective consciousness, and we have the ability to tap into it. So when we have a problem that we think that no one else has ever encountered, I guarantee you it has already been encountered, and there's already a solution to that problem. And one way we can find that solution is seek out people that have had the problem and say, hey, what did you do? And copy what they did. But also, you can connect to this field through meditation and ask for the truth to be revealed, and the answers will come to you. And now I know what you're saying is like, Dave, you're really going wild here. But I've experienced this firsthand multiple times. And the funny thing is about this is I was tuned into this as a kid. The first full book I ever read was this book called The Celestine Prophecies, and in that book, the only real takeaway I got reading this book when I was 9 years old or 10 years old was that there are no coincidences in life. Everything is happening synchronous, in perfect synchronicity. And you are constantly being guided towards achieving your maximum potential. So I was like, okay. So I really started tuning into this idea that there were no coincidences. And I said, okay, I believe that. There are no coincidences. And then I started tuning into the fact that, there is literally no coincidences. So, and I know you've all experienced this. You think of somebody, and then a day later or that day, you see that person, right? And you go, oh, what a coincidence. I was just thinking of you. Well, no, it wasn't a coincidence. Your energy, their energy was interacting in this field of infinite intelligence, and it brought you together, essentially, right? And so once I started becoming attuned to this, I was like becoming like a prophet, a young prophet. I would be like, someone would pop into my mind, and I would say to my friend or my girlfriend at the time, I'd say, I guarantee I'm going to run into this person today. And then like later that day, we would see them. And they would be like, they thought I was like this prophet that could, predict the future. But no, I was just tuning into the fact that there are no coincidences in life. So that was one example of tuning into this infinite intelligence. It's just like, it's available for us all and we can all tune into it. Great. Then there's other examples though. And scientists are starting to get in tune to this. They're starting to realize that this infinite intelligence is something that really exists. Another example is Roger Bannister, first guy to ever break the 4-minute mile. Before he did it, it was thought that it was physically, humanly impossible to run a mile in faster than 4 minutes. Roger Bannister figured out a way to do it, right? And once he did it, 2 or 3 weeks later, someone else did it. 2 or 3 weeks later, someone else did it. Up until that point, no one was able to do it. But as soon as the knowledge was in the field of how to do it, other people began to pick up on it. So because scientists know that this collective consciousness exists, they started doing experiments with mice, and they would give mice in, I think it's in Russia and United States. I'm not sure, but it could just be in the same lab. I don't know why I got Russia and United States, but that's the example I know. I'll probably have to research this a little bit more, but they gave mice in Russia a maze and mice in the United States a maze, and neither mice could figure it out. Neither groups of mice could figure it out because it was a really hard maze. It was almost like the moment that the mice in Russia figured it out, the mice in America were able to figure it out, right? And it's because that knowledge is stored in collective consciousness. And then you can see other examples of this that maybe you could call more genetics or whatever, but like, if a zebra is born in the wilderness, it's born and it begins to run immediately. Because if it doesn't run, it's going to get eaten. So that knowledge is also stored in collective consciousness. But you could also call that genetics or whatever, I guess. But the information is stored. Maybe that will help you connect to it a little bit more. Now, because this information is stored, we can learn to access that information at all times just by learning how to connect to the field. Okay? So how do you connect to the field? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. You get beyond the mind. You get beyond the analytical mind, you get outside of the circle of what you know, and you tune into that collective consciousness. So I'll give you some of my own examples of how this has played out in my own personal life. So there's the time I was considering writing a book, and I had these journals, and I in one of the journals I had written all the chapters of the book that I wanted to write, and so I lost the journals at one point. I couldn't find them. And I always kept them in my desk drawer, and I searched the whole entire house. I did what I always do. I stayed inside the circle of what I know. I tore apart my house, tore apart my car, went to the business, couldn't find them anywhere. I'm like, geez, how am I going to write this book now? Because a lot of these ideas had come to me through meditation, and I was like, I wasn't going to be able to remember them all. But now thinking back, I probably could have by using this exact same method. Anyways, going all over the place, trying to connect to where these things are, trying to find where these things are. And finally I said, you know what? I'm just going to put this collective consciousness to the test, because I was finally in this place where I was believing that this existed. I've seen enough to believe it. So after 2.5 days, I decided to get outside the analytical mind. I sat in meditation and I said, okay, well, God, you are all knowing, all powerful, all present. So you know where my journals are. Reveal it to me. And I sat there, and the first thing that came to me that they were stolen, and I was like, that doesn't seem right, and I could tell it was probably still in my analytical mind. And then the next thing was that they weren't taken by my own hand, and then I was like, oh, okay, now I'm starting to tune into something greater than myself, because that's not how I would talk. I wouldn't talk like they weren't taken by my own hand. And then the last thing that came to me before I opened my eyes was they're always in that drawer, and I looked in the drawer 100 times for these things and hadn't found them. So the second that I opened my eyes out of the meditation, I went to the drawer, I opened it, same thing I had seen, but the one thing that came to my mind at the second was that the drawer was very full. So I pulled the drawer completely out, and underneath the drawer was my journal. It wasn't taken by my own hand. It had been pushed off by the drawer, and it fell behind the underneath. And once I saw the journal, I was like, this wave of emotion flowed through my body, because I was like, oh my God, like this is real, right? Like this is real. Now, I guess the skeptics would say, well, you finally got out of your own way and you're able to see, but that is essentially what you're trying to do by connecting to the field of infinite intelligence. Now, but let me give you another example though, because that is something that, I technically put the journal in there, and technically, maybe I was just finally clearing my mind to remember where they were. Great. That doesn't explain this though. I've been a part of hundreds of healing treatments. I've had healing treatments. I've given healing treatments. I've been in group healing treatments. And I've observed time and time and again, myself, other people, me personally having it done to me, people being able to put their hands on me and get to the root of what's going on with me, right? I just experienced it recently. I was a part of a group healing treatment, and we were connecting to someone that had a friend. A friend had died, and she was experiencing a ton of grief, and we were connecting to that grief and helping her release the grief. And someone brought up that all I could see was like just her holding up a peace sign, like essentially saying, "Hey, I'm okay. Like, don't worry. Like, I'm good." And then later that day, the woman brought up a picture of her friend, the last picture that she ever had of her holding up the peace sign, right? And it's like, these are the things that are available for us to tap into, right? And just by her witnessing and observing that, it allowed her to begin to release that grief so she could become free of it, right? There's been way more, I would call them miracles, but now I don't consider them miracles because they happen all the time. I've been able to put my hands on people in healing treatments and get right to the root of what's going on in their life. And I bring it up into their awareness, and they immediately start breaking down crying, because finally, for the first time, that emotion that had been suppressed and repressed for their entire life was right there on the surface, and I was able to get there in 2 seconds, okay? So when you begin to heal at emotional levels, you can also heal at the physical level, because the emotional body has power over the physical body. The entire world is focused on the physical body, and that's what you're seeing right now with the coronavirus, right? We're seeing the entire world, and we're only focused on the physical, right? We're looking at this thing as a microscopic level. We're saying, yeah, if you get this thing, if you get it, you're gonna fall ill to it, right? But we're failing to look at every other thing that's going on, right? And one of the major factors to falling ill to the coronavirus is if you're in the emotional state of fear, your body's in the state of fight or flight, you get in contact with the coronavirus, and then you no longer have the immune response to fight the coronavirus off properly, because your body has been fighting the state of fear for the last 10 months that we've been in this thing, okay? But no one's looking at that. They're only looking at the physical, right? No one's looking at the emotional. No one's looking at the mental side effects that this thing has had. And also, for sure, no one's looking at the spiritual, okay? When we connect to the spiritual, we can heal at all levels instantaneously. This is what actually exists in the field. You can connect to this power, right? If you don't believe me, you can book a spiritual healing treatment with me. And you don't need to believe in it either. That's the other thing. It helps, right? You're open to it, but you don't need to believe in it. I've seen people that were skeptics get onto the table and go, whoa, I don't know what happened there, but something happened, right? And yeah, like that's the power that exists. And this is what Andrew's teaching. This is what I'm now teaching, is the ability to connect at the spiritual level, right? And that's what Anita did. Anita was able to connect. She was actually in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual field. She was there as a soul, as an essence, and as an energetic, etheric being. And she could see all in an instant, just like Elon Musk downloading into our phones into our brains in a second instead of having to type it, right? The world, the material world we live in is the typing, right? The spiritual being, the field is neural link, having it directly wired into our brains. We see it in a second, right? We see everything in a second. And that's the way she described it. She described it as like, I was going through life with a flashlight in a dark room. And when I went to the other side, it was like someone turned on the lights and I could see everything in the room. And I love that, right? She was able to see all, right? Every influence that led to her illness. And she was able to heal in that moment, right? And this is what we're trying to do when we do spiritual healing treatments on people. It's like we're trying to get beyond the analytical mind. We're trying to tap into the field. We're trying to tap into this all-knowing, all-present power. And we're trying to get to the root of the issue so that you can heal in an instant. Now, it doesn't always happen, right? But something happens. Something happens, even if it's a tiny little awareness, right? I just did a session with a client of mine, and we were in a letting go healing / treatment meditation, and we're getting to the root of the issue, which is that the feeling of being unloved or unwanted, right? And she experienced some of that letting go in that session, right? It was happening. She was letting go of the emotion. Did it fully release? No. But the awareness that it's there is usually enough to begin the process of letting go. So that's why sometimes you don't see these things happen instantaneously. So this is the power that exists for all of us to tap into. And it's pretty wild. All you have to do is open the door. All you have to do is be open and willing to believe that maybe you are not the be-all, end-all, and maybe there's a power greater than yourself. So the universe is I think it's about 14 billion years old. And we, as a human species, have only been on this planet for 7,000 years. Right? So when you think about that, it is just we are not even a tick on this thing. If you had a graph that went across this wall that represented 14 billion years, and you tried to put us on it, you wouldn't even be able to get us on. You wouldn't even see it, right? It's just the time frame is just way too huge, right? And we tend to think that we're the center of the universe, right? And then this is another thing that I do a lot with people, and let's do it here together. I think it'll be fun. So as you're sitting in your car, you're listening here, I want you to ask yourself the question. I want to say, what is the speed of light? What is the actual speed of light? If you know it, but just, take a guess. Okay. So the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second. 300,000 kilometers per second. And don't quote me on the exact. It's around there. It's 288. But I'm rounding up. 300,000 kilometers per second. So in 1 second, 1,000, you could go 300,000 kilometers. Okay? So, knowing how fast, insanely fast it is, you can't even wrap your mind around it. How long does it take a beam of light to get from the sun to the earth? Take a guess. Okay? It takes 8 minutes. All right, so 8 minutes, beam of light, sun to the earth, 300,000 kilometers per second. It's holy shit, the sun's far from us. Right? That's amazing. We feel the warmth and the power that's there, right? So 8 seconds. So now, if you look up in our galaxy, which is the Milky Way, in the night sky, you can see it, the big Milky, right? So if you were to get onto a vehicle that could travel at light speed, 300,000 kilometers per second, how long do you think it would take you to travel from one end of our Milky Way galaxy to the other? Take a guess. Lock in your answer. Final answer. The answer is about 100,000 years. 100,000 years going 300,000 kilometers per second. It's literally unfathomable how gigantic the universe is. I mean, not the universe, our galaxy is. So now, let me take you a step further. So Hubble, which was the telescope that got outside of our solar system, it was a satellite or whatever, got outside of our solar system, they were able to take an image of the universe, right? And from that image, they were able to estimate that there are over 200 billion galaxies. So wrap your mind around that. It takes 100,000 years just to travel across our galaxy, but there are 200 billion more. And that's actually not even the full truth. The universe is infinite and it's continuously expanding at the speed of light. So, and this is stuff that Hawkins proved on his own. So, through applied kinesiology. So, we think that we are the center of the universe. And we think that we have all of the answers. But the truth is, we are a speck of dust on a speck of dust. On a smaller speck of dust. We are a smaller speck of dust on a speck of dust in this vast, all powerful, all present, all knowing energy. But we want to try and figure it all out on our own. We think that we know better than this power. And if we can learn how to get beyond the ego and beyond that belief that we know what is best and that the world revolves around us, we can tap into the unlimited potential that exists for us all. And that is what I want to be doing for the rest of my life, is tapping into that power, healing people in an instant, having people have dramatic realizations that completely transform the path of their life. That's the power that exists for us all. And you can get there through the process of spiritual growth. You can get through the process of surrendering everything over to this higher power. And you can get there to the process of connecting to the infinite intelligence. And I just meditate. I just try and get beyond the mind, tap into the silence. That's where the answers are going to come, is from the silence, right? Not from the mind. If you're interested in learning any more about that, if you're interested in going deeper down the rabbit hole, the new year's coming and I'm accepting some new one-on-one clients. So you can hit me up on my website, davidhaas.ca, or DM me on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and I can let you know about my one-on-one packages. I am going to be releasing an online course soon too, which is going to go deeper than any online course has ever gone. And we're going to talk about how we can tap into these fields, how we can get the answer to any question that we have, how we can unlock our unlimited potential. And that's coming at a much more affordable rate than one-on-one, because more people need to know about this. You're seeing it in society right now. There's an awakening happening, whether you believe it or not, but it's happening. And unfortunately, we have to go through some shit before we all wake up. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast every Wednesday. I release a new episode, and I hope that this expanded your mind a little bit and allowed you to tune into what is actually possible for us all.